Hi guys, welcome back to Leonid Live Lounge. It's Adam here, Leonid's head of forensics, investigations and disputes. I'm really happy today to be joined by John Tira of Green Flash Accounting over in the United States. John's joined us to talk about his career to date, his experience as an entrepreneur setting up his own forensic accounting practice, and maybe sharing some advice to the next generation of forensic accountants. John, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Adam, for having me on, and I'm looking forward to this discussion today. I think it'll be a lot of fun, and hopefully useful for the audience as well. So thanks for having me.
It's a real pleasure. Well, thank you for being here. The opening question I usually have for guests is when you meet somebody new, say at a networking event, and they ask you what you do for a living, how do you explain the job of a forensic accountant?
Yeah, well, normally when you say you're an accountant, right, everyone's like, "Oh, I've got this tax question," right? So leading with that you're a forensic accountant sort of you know changes the mindset, and so once you do that, people start thinking CSI, and you can crack code and things like that, but when it comes down to it, I just basically tell people I help solve the accounting issues that, aren't really solvable by ordinary accountants, right? So I guess we consider ourselves extraordinary accountants, right? Because we can do things a little bit differently. But really it's just out of the box things or one-off problems and we help solve those issues. And as you know, right, forensic accountants come in many different flavors and shapes, right? Of different disciplines and focus areas. And so we don't do it all, but generally speaking, we help solve those one-off problems.
Brilliant. Going back in time a little bit then, maybe we can take you back to John's early career. Did you always know you wanted to be a forensic accountant? How did you end up getting into this line of work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm in my early 40s, and so I'm right at the precipice of folks that had forensic accounting as an opportunity to when they first came out of undergrad. Folks that are even a few years older than me didn't have that those practices really weren't established yet. But I did have that opportunity. But in undergrad, I didn't know what forensic accounting was when I was at university, and so sort of back-ended into it, like probably like most folks who are my age. So I did an internship in an investment bank, large, big, bulge bank, and hated it. Was beyond boring. A lot of late nights, but doing nothing during the day. I was like, this isn't for me. And then I did an internship with a large regional firm in their audit practice, and I was like, okay, I like this a little better, right? I like client interaction. I like a little more of the structure, but this wasn't for me either, right? And when I was finishing up my master's degree, there was a forensic accounting firm, Huron Consulting, that was recruiting at my master's program at Notre Dame. I knew a couple of guys that had gone over there and were working there, and I checked it out a little bit more, and I was like, wow, this is great. This is sort of that blend of finance and blend of accounting that I was looking for. My undergrad degree is in finance and economics, and my master's is in accounting, and so it was like that natural hybrid of what I was looking for. Uh, you know, like most people coming out of undergrad, you don't know exactly what you want to do. I said, this sounds like a great place to try things out. 20 years later, I'm still doing this work, but I couldn't have told you back then that I would be. But that's kind of how I got into this field. Like most people, it wasn't a straight line, but here I am, almost 20 years later.
And what's kept you in the field for that long? Because I think a lot of, probably now more than ever, people that leave an undergraduate or a master's program and go into the CPA profession, more and more often we're seeing people last 2, 3 years and then they're going out maybe into industry or leaving accounting altogether. What was it that kept you glued in and enabled you to have the career you've had?
Yeah, I think another great question, right? So everyone's paths take different ways, right? So some people have personal issues, some people have professional desires that they want to move out of accounting. And so that's all well normal, right? People spend 2 to 3 years getting a good foundation and they decide like, this isn't for me. I want to do something else. But for me, why I stuck with it, I've always liked the variety of the work and the challenging nature of the work. So every project that comes in, every dispute matter, every investigation is different. I mean, the foundation is similar, right? Your approach to those projects has to be kind of methodologically sound, right, and consistent, but the actual issues that relate to a project are going to be very different. And so the variety of work, the challenging nature of the work is something that's always drawn me to it, and I've had fun with it. And I think it's not just the work per se, right? I've been around good people, and like that's helped me stay in the path to it, right? Because in your field or anyone's field, right, if you're working with folks that aren't a lot of fun, you're probably not sticking with it, right? Because you're just going to find something else. But I've had the opportunity, I've been blessed to work with a lot of really outstanding individuals, and I think that's kept me in this career as well.
Excellent. Are there any maybe early cases or types of projects you can remember taking on that really cemented that love for the work as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of times with forensic accountants, it comes with a love-hate relationship, right? So it's when you dig in that you really realize that this is for you or not for you. And again, I think that's true of any industry, right? If you're doing tax returns, right, and you're approaching a deadline, right, like that's you're gonna find out if you like it or you're not. And my path's no different. So when I first started my career, one of the early projects I was working on was a large litigation Ponzi type element to the matter, and so at the core, there was two separate books and records, one that was managed internally and the other one which provided to regulators and auditors and so on and so forth. And they said two different things. And the team that I was working on really had to reconcile all that back together and figure out what happened, when it happened, so on and so forth. And there was a lot of 2 a.m. nights and 8 a.m. mornings for months on end. And I think, again, when you're in that element, one, you have to like the work or you're not going to stick around, right? You're going to find something else that's more of a 9 to 5 that you like better or another industry in general that you like better. But two, it's like the people you work with. And I had a great group that I was working with, some really smart people at the top, the partner at the top at that time, and then great managers and great people I was working with. And so I was lucky to start at Huron Consulting with such a great group of people and a great culture that made it fun working till 2 a.m., which doesn't sound normal, but that's sort of what kept me in it. I think like that one project probably set me up for the rest of my career in terms of work ethic, in terms of understanding how to approach a project in its entirety, but also mini projects within a project as well, and sort of bifurcating and segmenting out different aspects of a project and how you execute and how you get the work done.
As you say, you progressed your career and then you took a decision, a move a few years back that I think increasingly I'm hearing from professionals in the forensics world they're interested in doing. You took the entrepreneurial route. You set up your own practice. Can you remember when those thoughts started to evolve? Had you always sort of had that entrepreneurial side? Had that always sort of been a goal for you? Or was there a certain point in your career that you started to think, no, I really need to go off and do this?
Yeah. Um, I don't know if there was this bright line moment that said like, aha, I want to do this. But a few years after working at Huron Consulting, I moved over to McGladrey or now RSM, and I was working in the Chicago office, big office at the time, still is a big office. And then my wife and I, we got married. We moved to San Francisco, and I moved to that office. And when I moved out there, there was about 15 people in the office, as opposed to maybe 1,000 in Chicago at the time, and there's probably a couple thousand in Chicago now. And so I moved out there, and I was the lone person in that office that worked on forensic accounting matters. So it was really a sink or swim type element. I needed to go generate revenue. I needed to go find clients. I needed to go find work. And that just didn't mean like externally. I had a network internally as well. And I think that's something that might be lost sometimes, but like that's an important aspect of being at a big firm and finding work to do. And so that was sort of what led me to the start of the path on the entrepreneurial side. Maybe up to that point, I'd been working maybe 6, 7 years, and that was all project execution, understanding the work in forensic accounting. And then when I moved to San Francisco with RSM, it was learning about how to build and develop a practice. And so that was a different take on things. And the other thing I'll add to that is having the right people around you. I talked earlier about a great group of people at Huron, but RSM was no different. And I had great leaders like Patrick Schlinsky and Bob Jacobson and Mitch Hirsch that really looked out for me, mentored me, make sure that I was developing in the way that I needed to develop, offering tips, offering ideas about how to approach project execution, managing people, selling work, all those types of things. And so I was learning and growing while there. And then once I had sort of had some success selling some work, executing some work, getting some testimony experience, fast forward to 2021, we just had our first child, our daughter, and I was like, I don't know if I want to be working at a large public accounting firm. I might want to pave my own way. And I decided, hey, if I'm ever going to do it, now is the right time to do it, right? If I can always go back to a firm, right? There's going to be plenty of firms that may need my help or want to work with me. And I was lucky to develop a large enough network where I knew a lot of people, but it really kind of developed while I was developing. So I learned how to build a practice while in a big firm, build my niche within a large firm, and then I was able to translate that relatively seamlessly into my firm. Again, I didn't know how it was going to go at first. I had no clients. I had non-compete provisions I wanted to be respectful of, but things have worked out. And I think we learned the tools at the larger firms about how to develop and build a practice.
Absolutely. I'd love to jump into some of those tools, actually, if that's okay. But maybe as a start, just for anyone listening, could you give a little bit of an overview around the services that you're offering at Green Flash and maybe just provide a bit of an overview of the firm and the structure and what you're doing?
Yeah, so it's really no different than what I've been doing my entire career. It's forensic accounting. Within forensic accounting, I usually think of like four different disciplines. I think of family law. I think of valuation in the context of litigation. I think of financial damages or economic damages, and I think of financial investigations, fraud investigations, things of that nature. And my focus is really on commercial damages, litigation disputes, and then investigations. That's been my career since day one, essentially. And I don't do the other two elements. I've worked on those matters. It's not like that they're exclusive or I can't do them, but I focus on those other two elements. And since starting my firm, I've really been more segmented more towards the litigation, the dispute side of things. And that's sort of out of convenience or necessity because when you're running a financial investigation, oftentimes you need an army of people to do some sort of investigation. We don't have an army of people anymore. I don't work at a large public accounting firm. There's a small group of 4 people. And so we focus more on the dispute side of things. And so what does that mean within the dispute area, right? We're talking about a niche within a niche, right? So it is your typical loss profits, damages analyses. It's answering complicated financial and accounting questions within the context of litigation, working on a real estate matter and tracing funds to see what money went in, what money went out, those types of elements, sort of a quasi-investigation or traditional forensic accounting analysis within litigation. And then I do a lot of work on post-acquisition disputes. And so like that was a focus area that I developed when I was at RSM and I brought it with me. And that's an area that's, focusing on working capital disputes, earn-out disputes, financial and accounting representations and warranties within a purchase agreement, those types of matters. And so that's what I focus on. And so that's what we focus on as a firm. Does that help?
Excellent. It does. Yeah, no, that's a really good overview. And I think it's useful for people to have that context because I think the forensic market is so fragmented now, particularly for any of those professionals maybe thinking about setting up on their own, but maybe they're currently employed at a much larger firm. These firms are increasingly siloing off their staff. They want teams that are dedicated to intellectual property disputes or solely cryptocurrency and digital asset investigations or uh, just asset tracing investigations. And so I think it's probably a useful takeaway for people to know that if you are going to go and set up on your own, first of all, you probably need a bit of a background in a variety of projects. And also, like you say, maybe don't pick a niche where you then need an army of people to come in and support you on the work. Because unless somehow you've got very deep pockets to go and facilitate that's obviously going to incur part of the startup cost, right, of going on your own. Where if you can work on projects that really you can deliver it on your own or maybe with some sort of contracting assistance or bringing one or two sort of close friends or colleagues in, that's going to make it an easier hurdle to get over in terms of the startup journey.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we may touch on this later in this interview, but one of the things we're seeing right now is like large consolidation of forensic accounting firms. Maybe right now we're the precipice of that undoing of that, so to speak. But we've seen a lot of consolidation, a lot of gobbling up of forensic accounting firms, and a large number of those firms have specialties in one area or one discipline, maybe it'd be bankruptcy and restructuring, intellectual property, specific antitrust valuation, those types of things. And what that means is that there's those small firms that maybe had less overhead and were more mom and pop shop, maybe like my firm, don't exist anymore, right? And so there's this large opening within, maybe call it the lower middle market, still really, really interesting types of matters, but it's not, public company A versus public company B. It's typically privately held companies that maybe have some sort of dispute. And I mention that because those types of disputes have a lot of different flavors and a lot of different variety to them. And so being able to say yes to those projects is a big kind of attraction to attorneys when they're looking for folks to help out, right? And so because some of those smaller firms have now sort of left that lower middle market, they've joined big firms, their rate structure may not fit that lower middle market. there's an opening for other folks, for my firm, for other firms of my size. And so I mention all that because I think it's an interesting trend, but what it means is that that specialization that you may be developing at a big firm may not serve you well if you want to move into a smaller firm. And so the world is becoming specialized, right? That's definitively true, right? There's no question about that. But there is a role for generalists or quasi-generalists. I don't consider myself a generalist. I don't do, like we talked earlier about the 4 disciplines I consider. I work on 2 of those, and then within those, I work on a subset of cases. So I have some specialization, but I'm not so specialized where I'm like so heavily niched in one particular area, right? Which is going to box you out from other areas. So there's a balance, right, Adam? Just like everything in life, you want to make sure you have the toolkit and sort of that experience that you can work on other types of projects that may not be within that very narrow sweet spot, but you can't be everything to everything at the same time.
Completely agree. Speaking on the toolkit that maybe you're going to need to go and take into setting up on your own, getting the first expert appointment, first time that you're going to have lawyers entrust you to be the person to get up there and to present that evidence. That's probably one of the most frequent challenges I hear when I'm talking to candidates in the forensic accounting world. There may be experienced senior managers, young directors, something like that. They're at a firm with some really big name partners. They know they want to be a partner one day, whether that's at an existing firm or to set up on their own. But they know really to make that step, they need to get experience. They need to get that first appointment in. And that seems to be one of the real challenges. I don't know if there's any thoughts you could share. I know obviously it's going back a little bit for you in terms of when it was your time to get the first appointment. But if there are any insights, maybe you can share around what people could do to maybe prepare for that and go about trying to win that first piece of business on their own.
Yeah, I don't think there's any one method that gets you to unlock that first testimony experience. But there's a lot of things that can trip you up and preclude you from getting there. But if I'm thinking about a lot of different areas that you need to focus on, the first one is do good work. Like you're never going to be asked to be the testifying expert if you don't do good work. How is anyone going to know that you do or don't good work if you've never been a quote unquote lead expert? Well, people know. You know, there's junior attorneys on other matters, right, that you may be working with as the partner you're working with is face to face with the other partner. They know if you do good work or not, right? And they've got you in the back pocket, understanding like who you are and who you might be. So again, you got to do good work, right? Secondly is you got to make it known that this is what you want to do. Being a testifying expert is not for everyone. And I mean that in the sense of like not everyone's good at it, but also like there's a lot of people who just don't want to do it. And that's okay. There's roles for everyone within forensic accounting, right? If you want to be or not to be a testifying expert. But if you don't say anything, if you're not being intentional about your career, other people may not understand that that's where you want to go as well. So I think I think that's another important part is making sure it's known that this is what you want to do. And then the third part is make sure you're at the right place that's going to support you in the development of your career. And that's not everywhere. Some places there's partners that are going to hoard testifying opportunities, right? Because it's quote unquote their client, they want to control the relationship, so on and so forth. And from my seat, like it is a big ocean. There's a lot of work out there, and there's probably not enough qualified people to do the work. And we need more testifying experts that are coming in through their career. Maybe they're in their late 20s, early 30s. We need more of them, right? There's a silver tsunami going on, continues to go on. There's people exiting this industry. We need qualified people to come in. And so I'm of the approach that like we needed to train and develop those people to do good work. And I think if you're at the right firm, you're going to find people that are going to help you get there, right? They're going to say, you know, this is a case that we otherwise may not take because it's, you know, the economics may not work or, you know, whatever it may be, right? But we're going to take it because we think that this is a matter that you can be the testifying expert on. And we're going to say, we're only taking it if you pick so-and-so, Johnny or Susie or whoever to be the testifying expert. And to have that is invaluable. And not every firm is willing to do it, but the firms that are willing to invest in their people and the success and, you know, rising tide raises all ships, right? And I think that the more testifying experts you have within your firm or within industry helps us overall.
Completely agree with that. And I think it's a really good part of a firm's mindset that they should be embedding for both staff retention and recruitment, actually. Because if you've got good, young, up and coming people that can't see a way they're going to become an expert in your firm, they're going to leave. And likewise, if other firms are blocking that entry route and you can offer it, it's a great way to attract those up and coming talents to come and join your practice. So yeah, some great thoughts. Thank you for that. I guess other side to sort of running a business, obviously you're delivering the client work, that is your product. But I imagine there's probably loads of other challenges that you've had to overcome along the
Right.
way of being a business owner. Again, maybe for people that are salaried employees today for a larger firm that have never had to think about this. Maybe what are some of the challenges that maybe people just would not have thought about when it comes to running their own practice?
Yeah, I think back to my career, and like I talked earlier about, it started with learning how to execute projects and do good work, right? And then I mentioned moving to San Francisco with RSM and sort of building the practice, selling the work, managing people. And then the third part that I'm at right now, and I'm sure there's fourth part and fifth part and so on, there's going to be continuing learning curves. But that third part was running the firm, all the administrative items that sort of fall behind the scenes that you don't have to worry about when you're at a big firm, but when it's your own firm, you got to do all on your own. And so setting up bank accounts, setting up an organization, running payroll, having insurance, like these are all things that I never had to worry about when I was at a big firm, and I certainly have to worry about now. And so um, one, still haven't figured it out. We're 4.5 years in. We're continuing to try new things. Right now, we're working on a project management system that hopefully will help us work a little bit faster and more efficient. But it's continuous, right? We're continuing to learn. So there's all sorts of different things and out there that you need to be thinking about. And there's no playbook for it. There's no how-to guide, and so you kind of have to lean on experts in the field, right? So maybe you have a corporate attorney you can lean on to say, here's things you should be working on. Here's how I draft this agreement. But one of the things that I found really valuable is my network of folks within the industry, people that run their own firms, have started their own firms that maybe are more advanced than I am, or I've been doing it for longer than I have. Don't necessarily have to be bigger firms, could be smaller firms, bigger firms, you name it, right? But people I can just lean on that I trust that are going to give me a good advice, right? And I think of all the time I spent in California and working with the California Society in the forensic services section. I think Greg Regan's been a great mentor to me. Annette Stalker has been super helpful, just providing little tips here and there about like, hey, you should do this, right? Or this software has been really, really great for us. And guess what? This one wasn't, right? And you might have thought that this one was going to be, you know, the best software you can imagine. Maybe it didn't end up being that way. So finding a group of people that you can lean on to talk about different tools and techniques to run the firm is also really important. Just like we're having this conversation right now where I'm talking about my career and so on and so forth, there's no shortage of people that want to provide advice within this field to other people who are just starting out. And so um, for younger forensic accountants, for people who are starting their own practices, if people approach me and say, "Hey, I'm so and so, I'm starting my own firm. How do you do this?" Like, I'm always going to be an open book and try to provide my advice and say, "This is what works for us. Maybe it doesn't work for you, but this is what works for us, and this is what didn't work for us," which is probably even more invaluable. Like, don't go down this path because you're going to be just chasing rabbits, so to speak. So those are the things I'd say is like have a great network and wherever you can find that through your state society. I find a lot of value in the AICPA FDS section, the Forensic Evaluation Services section. Lots of great people. I've met a lot of great friends and people that I can borrow or maybe steal ideas from. I'd say get involved there. But the other part is don't be afraid to raise your hand and ask, right? People are willing to help. People you don't know. Most people who are in this profession for the long haul are good people. And they're probably going to be willing to help the next generation because we know that we need a lot of strong forensic accounts to come through the ranks.
I couldn't agree more. You've attributed a lot in this conversation to mentors that you had earlier on in your career. And obviously that sort of pay it forward attitude, the work you're doing now. I'm really pleased you brought up the AICPA because I was going to mention this as, sort of professional networking events in an age of Teams calls and WhatsApp messages and the never-ending inbox of emails that you need to answer. In-person events are so valuable, aren't they? You've been involved with the AICPA for a while, right? The membership, as it grows, surely it's a great opportunity for younger professionals to get involved and come and meet more experienced practitioners and learn from them and get some really valuable face-to-face time that I think we're all kind of lacking in the modern era.
Yeah. I think you have to pick and choose, right? You can't be at every conference. It just, you have to really guard your schedule, especially as a business owner, right? Like there's all sorts of things that can get stuck on your calendar, and is this a really good use of time? But I will tell you, going to the Forensic Evaluation Services Conference for the last several years has been a big boon to my career. You can't measure it, right? There's no like art, but the relationships that I developed have been immensely powerful. And attending the conference online is useful too, right? You get a lot of great content and feedback. But like most things in life, it's the happy hour after the conference, right? Or it's having dinner with colleagues, right? Or it's the one-off conversations you're having in a coffee break and meeting someone. I mean, that's life, right, in a nutshell, right? Like, where do you meet your spouse, right? How do you get into school? Like these things are just, kind of have these weird one-off features to them, and just being present is really, really important, right? Just being there, being in the mix. And so, yeah, this past conference, which was just a few weeks ago, again, I thought was outstanding, right? I saw a lot of familiar faces, people I hadn't seen in a year or so. It was great to catch up with them. And then I met a lot of new faces too. I met a lot of new people that I'm sure I'm going to know for the next 15, 20, 30 years, however long I'm in this profession. And having that Rolodex, so to speak, having that network of people to lean on is really important. And I mentioned it's hard to measure ROI, and it is from attending a conference, but there is an ROI from time to time. And I do get referrals from that group, like people, maybe this case isn't for them, right? Because of the discipline, or maybe they're too busy with other cases, right? And they can't take something on. And them knowing me and me knowing them is really important, right? Because we can share opportunities, we can share approaches and techniques. And so there really is an ROI, and it can be revenue related as well, not just, related to, better knowledge or better relationships, which is hard to quantify. And as accountants, we love to quantify, but I think that there is a lot of value in attending conferences in general, and especially that.
I couldn't agree more. And obviously, the American listeners will probably know the AICPA. For those in the UK, our ICAEW, our equivalent, have their own expert committee and conference. We're seeing all sorts of things pop up now here in the UK. We've got the Female Fraud Forum, which is a women's initiative to get lawyers, in-house investigators, forensic accountants from accounting firms, anyone working in that area of combating fraud to get them together. I'm a big believer. Yeah, go somewhere where you can get some of that really valuable face time. I think it's going to be so valuable moving forward as we all become more and more digitized in the way we work. So that's great. Thank you. I guess sort of a final thing I wanted to run through with you, and you started to allude to it earlier, was sort of the consolidation in the industry. And I think that's definitely one point maybe we should talk about, but just whether there's any sort of emerging trends that you're starting to see, maybe things you're picking up, for example, at conferences like that, where you're chatting to other practitioners, or things you're just seeing day to day at your firm.
Yeah. I mean, there's always the natural shifts. Now there's new administration, and maybe there's not as much of a focus on white collar or monitorships. And so there's a shift within forensic accounting, right? And that's temporary, that's cyclical, because there'll be a new administration that comes through and makes changes, right? And that's normal, right? I think what's different though is the consolidation within the industry, with the influx of money coming from private equity to buy up firms and to put small firms together to make big firms. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think remains to be seen, but that is certainly a thing that's happening in terms of consolidation. And if you think about consolidation, the reason that's occurring is because there's the attractiveness to have more ROI, more earnings based off of putting firms together, right? And how do you do that, right? Well, you raise rates and you specialize, right? And we talked earlier about the specialization within forensic accounting and why and how that's so important today. And I think that's continuing to be a trend as well. So we're seeing within those firms, those larger firms, where there's a large silo, if you will, right, or a large focus of folks who work on a specific element within forensic accounting. And I think you're going to see that trend to continue. But with every trend, there's sort of what is sort of impacted from it, right? For every action, there's a reaction, right? And I do think that there's this wide open area within, call it the middle market, lower middle market, for smaller firms to emerge, right? And so I think that's something that we're starting to see. I'm seeing more people take a leap, like, hey, I don't want to be at this big firm, or maybe they join one of those big firms we were talking about in consolidation and said, hey, I'm not going to stay here. I'm going to go back and do my own thing because I liked it better, right? Not everyone will. Lots of people probably love being at a big firm, but I think you're probably going to see sort of that shift again, right? So it's sort of like, if you think about people moving to the suburbs and moving back to the city, moving back to the suburbs, I think that it's that trend, right? Where right now everyone's kind of getting pushed together, and then eventually it'll break up and we'll have more smaller firms again. And so where are we at in that curve? I can't tell you, but that the cyclicality always seems to happen. And I think that we're somewhere in that right now.
I'd largely agree, at least from what I see as a recruiter. If I look at 2025 as a whole, the two areas that have been keeping recruiters like me busy and therefore is kind of reflective of where the demand is either large firms within really niche specializations. So this year that's been intellectual property, probably post-deal, post-M&A disputes, and on the investigation side, yeah, maybe things like cryptocurrency, digital assets, those sort of emerging markets. You're completely right. Firms that are reliant on monitorships or huge international FCPA investigations are really struggling. And then at the other end, the other firms that are keeping us really busy are middle market players who the partners are a little bit more, I'd use the word dynamic, but what I mean by that is they're used to working with lots of different types of clients in different industries on different types of projects throughout the year. They've not been reliant for the last 4 years on a monitorship to make up 90% of their billings. And therefore they're used to throughout the year using their network to pick up lots of smaller pieces of work, which throughout the year really add up. And, whether it be family law or maybe shareholder disputes at, sort of smaller, medium-sized companies, or just your classic fraud cases, those medium-sized firms or boutique players, they're doing well enough that they need to hire. So in my view, that normally suggests they've got enough work going around. I'd mirror exactly what you said. It's, at least from a recruiter's perspective, the two places that seem to be doing well are the really big shops, but with a niche angle, or the middle market players that can turn their hand to a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, and I don't think that that's too much of a secret either. Like we are all seeing it as practitioners, and we know who's busy and who's not busy. You can kind of see shifts with firms that focus on areas that maybe aren't as busy, or shifts in firms that aren't very, very busy, right? And so, and again, it's cyclical. It'll change back at some point. We just don't know when, right?
Absolutely. John, it's been brilliant chatting today. Thank you so much. I will, in the show notes, your LinkedIn profile and your website if anyone wants to inquire maybe about collaborating with you or like you say, sort of getting a bit of that mentorship or advice on setting up their own firm. So that'll be in the comments below. It's been really great chatting. It's been some great insight here. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Adam. It's great being here. And like you said, I'm happy to provide my advice or knowledge if I can. And thanks for providing the platform to speak. And it's been great chatting today. So thank you.
Great stuff. Take care.